Okay. So officially we are recording. Welcome to session 5 of Masters of Destiny. So for those of you who are here with us live and those of you who are joining us in spirit afterwards with the recording, then welcome. It's a delight to be able to share this space with you again. And, you know, we were just actually saying offline the whole timing of this at the moment is such that we are in an amazing place. And I say amazing because it actually is an amazing place of I don't know at the moment. And that's really, you know, I don't know what is opening up. I don't know what is unfolding. The influences right now are quite incredible and quite intense. And there's a lot of exhaustion. And at some points, it may be like we're literally trying to build foundations on quicksand. And that is also it's relative to the wavelengths and the frequencies of the waves that we're walking into now, the 8th and the 9th waves that we're going to be working with. Because as we've said before, each wave is 20 times faster in respect of frequency than the wave before it. So we're really looking at very, very rapid turnarounds and rapid changes. And in this place of I don't know, where we become open to all possibilities, it's like those potentials and possibilities reveal themselves in a very short space of time at the moment when we step back, surrender, and don't try and control them. So we are in an absolutely fascinating place. And an amazing place that is filled with potential. So with that in mind, let's have a look and step into the frequencies of the 8th wave. And again, there's lots of dots that have actually been connected during the process. So let me share some of that with you. Let me get the slideshow up. Right. Okay, so everybody, we have the 8th wave, and that's appropriately called the awakening. And because the essential activation of the holograms of this wave have taken place within our lifetime, this is a wave with a lot of information and a lot of understanding that we will have direct relationship to. We have seen the impacts of this wave unfolding in our lifetime. We've seen some of the 7th wave because that had the wavelength cycle of 39 years. So we will have seen a lot of that. With the 8th wave, we're getting into much, much shorter time cycles. So we will have noticed a lot of incredible change. So hopefully we can learn a lot through this process and begin to understand how we are being impacted in our lives at this particular moment in time. And there were a lot of mentions made, I think, with the 7th wave as well about how our experience of these frequencies and these waves lends itself to the perception of time actually speeding up. So this certainly adds to the process because the turnaround is much, much quicker. So in essence, let's have a look at the 8th wave and the big awakening that it's been responsible for. So in this particular session, we're going to have a look at initial awakening and the tools for staying awake, honoring the rising feminine, mystery schools, and inclusive spiritualities as part of the process of development. Because everything that we've experienced through the 8th wave, we had to develop in order to rewire our brains and adapt our minds to the holograms that the 8th wave was actually bringing us. We see the rise in healing arts and links to earlier waves, specifically the 5th wave. The shift from west to east and what this means personally and collectively, what we're also witnessing in the world at the moment. Why the children are different, and also abstaining from labels because we have a tendency to want to label them. Changing educational approaches to align with the shifts, why current educational methods will become increasingly ineffective. As a consequence of these new holograms. From mind to heart, superpowers and being human. Externalization of mastery, that's an interesting one because to a large extent we have externalized the concepts of mastery by personifying other dimensional beings as as having the mastery that we seek rather than it actually coming from within. So we're going to have a look at that as part of the functionality and the unfolding of the eighth wave. Trigger codes for the eighth wave holograms, and they are many, many and varied, but it's just being able to recognize that this is happening and it is a real phenomenon. The age of Aquarius versus Leo, the hazards of the limitless mind, the eighth wave, and being discerning, because the eighth wave just opens us up to everything in a sense, and it's boundaryless. And yet without those boundaries, without a measure of discernment, it can create havoc with our mental processing and mental capacity. And one of the downfalls and outfalls of that is mental instability. And we do see in the world at the large at the moment a rise in classification of mental illnesses, and also the occurrence of mental illnesses where individuals just simply cannot cope. So let's take a look without further ado at the eighth wave. So bear in mind, we've got the chat room. So if any of you want to put your comments in the chat room, then please do. So as a refresh, here we are now at the eighth wave, which has a duration in physical time, one part of the cycle of 360 days. So we have 360 days in the day phase of the wave, and we have 360 days in the down cycle or the night period of the wave. So the totality of the total wavelength is 720 days. So you'll notice that 360 is just 5 days short of a year. So almost on an annual basis, we go from daylight into nighttime, daylight into nighttime. And right now in this even year, in this odd year of 2019, we are in an upward cycle. So this started in 99. So every odd year, we actually hit another one of those daytime cycles. So we're in a day of the eighth wave. So it's a day of really powerful positive change and also possible confusion, which is what we were saying earlier. Loads and loads of letting go, loads of opening up, loads of asking us to surrender. Anyway, so there we go. 360 days in the daytime, 360 days in the downtime, down cycle for healing. And this wave was initiated and activated, essentially the holograms were activated in 1999. And this is something that most of us would be able to relate to because, and I've said this before I actually even discovered Carl Kalleman's work, is that round about 98, 99, there was almost a massive surge in awakening, that people woke up to spiritually oriented ideas, whether it was just connecting with angels, whether they were just scratching the surface of it. They woke up to something beyond their physical world. It opened up their concepts, opened up their belief systems. For some, it was deeper and more intense than others. For some, it was much lighter, and they've been too afraid to go deeper into these realms. But yeah, round about 98, 99, there was a massive awakening, but there was a pre-wave that I'll talk about in a moment. And it literally is, it's a self-authored approach to life. So we've seen, because of the pre-wave, the impacts of this from about the mid-80s, mid-1980s onwards. And if we look at the mid-1980s, at the culture that was evident in that time, it was all about me. I create reality. Look at that as a buzzword or a buzz phrase that has really infiltrated. It's become a very entrenched meme, if you like, in respect of our culture at the moment. It's like, I author my own life. So rather than us being at the behest of the social environment, governed and manipulated and moved by the social environment or by the ruling patriarchy and hierarchy of the sixth and the seventh waves, this marked a massive shift in perspective. And the 80s, of course, they were all about money, status, you know, sort of going for it. It wasn't necessarily seen from a spiritual perspective, but it was that self-authoring, that self-aligned perspective that influenced the culture, the behaviors, the trends during the 80s, and that then continued. So that did have a massive effect. Right, so overall, the eighth wave, initiated in 99, wavelength of 720 days, 360 either side. It is within this wave, it is the right brain that receives the light. The left brain is essentially in darkness. So let's have a look. Oh, that's interesting. Rachel's just said, interesting how the musicians became much more expressive. Different styles of music, absolutely. Rapid shifts and changes. You know, and even those musicians that had actually been well known in the 60s and the 70s, they had to begin adapting their style much more quickly. I even look at, you know, people like the Bee Gees, for instance, and how they adapted by teaming up with other artists and doing duets. So yes, a lot more expression, a lot more in respect of the different styles that started emerging from the 80s onwards. Yeah, thank you for that. So the left brain in this instance is actually in the dark. So you'll see from that previous slide with the holograms here that we have a mirror effect. The right brain receives the light, so the right brain is receiving the holograms. The right brain is the connection to our intuitive female essence, to realms beyond, to the divine, to the mysteries of the universe, to emotional beingness, our emotional self. This is where we also started seeing the rise of management programs that actually incorporated sort of deeper psychological aspects and education, if you like, for management in the corporate environment. So a lot of that, it's a lot of right brain stuff. But what this meant for a lot of people is that the left brain actually essentially switched off. It's in the dark. So the left brain, masculine, reasoning, logical brain, is less effective. It is still running the previous holograms because it's not receiving the light of the new inputs. And this has had detrimental adverse effects to and for a lot of people who opened up to the eighth wave. So it's important to actually be aware of this. So it's the ability to reason and think and discern. Okay, so the left brain is in the dark. The pre-wave was in 1986, according to Carl Kalleman. These are his figures. And what we actually see if we go back historically, and this was long before Carl Kalleman actually wrote the book, is that in 1987, in accordance with the pre-wave, we had what is known as the harmonic convergence. Rachel says here, clothes in that time were more colorful, unisex. I think it's really important to understand the waves determine what we are able to access through our own filters. Absolutely, absolutely. Oops, sorry, moved that along too quickly. Thank you. So the harmonic convergence of 1987, what was it? It was the first globally coordinated meditative event that the world had seen. So it was about the convergence of peoples from a global perspective. It was this global village, this opportunity for everybody to come together with a unified perspective, to understand that the art and act of people having the same intention, all focused on the same thing at the same time, could actually impact a change at the quantum level in the fields within which we are embedded. So this actually took place in 1987. So it's like bang on aligned with the eighth wave inputs, for want of a better description of the eighth wave frequencies. So yeah, rather fascinating. I mean, since then, these worldwide and global meditations, because of the internet capabilities that have advanced so quickly, have become quite commonplace. But that was the first one of its nature. The eighth wave, by its very nature, is polarized. So while there's a lot of people who have been through and experienced an awakening, who now proclaim oneness with all that is as a consequence of the awakening, there is a lack of recognition of the polarization that still exists. The form took many different forms. One of them was actually the negation of the physical body. So people were more interested in what was out there and that connection than the connection within and the physical form. So that polarization happened, and is still evident to a large degree as well. So the eighth wave brought with it the mind and the ideas and principles for the digital revolution. So that is all about the internet and technology, which is really quite fascinating. However, what that's given rise to as a consequence of this, so it's all utilizing digital technology as well to improve and speed up all of our life processes, ultimately with the aim of making our life more streamlined and easier. However, this has led to the development of robotics, the automation of many of the tasks that used to be performed by humans, and not only the automation, but increasing the efficacy of the way that those tasks have been completed. So we saw the automation of factories and plants and massive industrial machineries, if you like. So what has actually happened is that it has, in essence, reduced the marketplace in respect of the types of economic stimulating opportunities that are there. So factory workers, there are still some factories and some processes that require the human input. However, there is an absolute reduction. So the rise in unemployment figures that we have seen over recent decades is absolutely a function also of the eighth wave. It's led to even bigger economic gaps and financial inequality between people. And we have seen this is that no matter what they've done by operating on the old system, the old financial systems, the wealthy continue to get wealthier because they have the means to take advantage of the automation and to make the investments in the automation, etc. Whereas those who relied on manual labor as a form of income have actually been getting poorer and poorer as processes have become more efficient. Human labor cannot actually match that. So the rate of payment, the need for human labor for so many of those processes has actually declined. So people, in essence, have gotten poorer. Okay. Hence, we see the credit boom and the credit cycles and the boom bust cycles that have actually emerged since the 80s, where credit became the big thing, false way of boosting the economy. So this has been very evident and sort of behind the scenes for many years. There's probably another bust coming. Hence the need for the review of the financial systems that was spoken about the last time with the seventh wave. What we also saw and see with the eighth wave is novel spirituality, novel and eclectic ideas about what spirituality actually is, ranging from connecting with ascended masters, connecting with angelics, connecting with ETs and star beings, and you name it. It's all just blown wide open. It's like the lid came off the right wave, and a highly psychic environment. But this in itself has also posed a number of difficulties. It has its benefits and it has its drawbacks, because that psychic environment gives us the ability to be able to develop what we might think of as the organic internet, which is our opportunity to interconnect with each other. However, this has opened up people to the traumas, the ancestral psychic environment, the collective psychic fields, and all of the trauma and the inner demons that are associated with that trauma that have now become a part of that environment. So navigating our way through that territory is really quite a quagmire, and that's where our discipline and our own ability to know what is the truth, to be able to continue to connect with our own source, with our own core, is absolutely vital, to have a firm foundation in this world and to have integrated all of our learnings is really important. Lots of psychic debris out there with the opening up. Interestingly, no real inventions. So it wasn't like somebody invented the telephone over and during the period of the eighth wave, not like with the previous waves in the Industrial Revolution. Nobody reinvented the washing machine. Nobody reinvented the sort of communication systems. Nobody reinvented the steam engine or the railway. What it's really been is an upgrading of pre-existing inventions. So it's been digitalization of existing technology to actually improve that technology. So that's an interesting concept. Comment here, it feels more that people want a more simple life. Yeah, but I think that's exactly it. But it's looking at opening up to that psychic environment has opened us up to a whole lot of chaos, and the pace at which life is moving has changed. So there is a desire to want to simplify and to integrate everything that we've opened up to. So yes, there is a need for a simpler life, because things just keep on driving forward and forward, and this limitlessness that goes along with this open mind, if you like. You know, there's that wonderful saying, keep your mind open, but not so open that your brains fall out. You know, so there's a wonderful expression to bear in mind, because for whatever we are learning as a consequence of having that opening, we need to utilize the other side of our brain and our rational mind to be able to integrate it and connect bodily. So yes, it's really important. So there is a strong visual component to this wave. So it's strongly visual. So it's not, Dao Yi, that's interesting. Sorry, I'm just watching you doing things with your fingers there. Is that anything related to what we are doing? Or is that can't hear you.
I did not know you can see me.
You're on camera. Yeah, I was just watching this and I thought, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I try to relate what you know, with my background, Chinese, you know, learning.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Part of the integration. Okay, I'm just going to mute that again. So strong visual imagery component that's associated with this wave, and that really does go along with this, you know, sort of right brain opening. The left brain looks for the writing, for the speech, for the language, if you like. So here we actually see inventive languages. We see, you know, all of these three-letter acronyms, all of the new languages of Twitter, the shortcuts, you know, to speed things up. So people are feeling the pace of it. So all of the short text is like a new shorthand that's actually emerged as a consequence of this. A lot of it's based on images. We see the emojis coming out, the emotional depictions of how it is that we're feeling, rather than having to spell it out in words. So we see a lot of those things actually happening. So think video, the rise of YouTube, Netflix, Amazon, all of the visual media that stimulate and have been stimulating our brains are part and parcel of this particular holographic download, an aspect of mind. Powerfully along with this is a reawakening of the feminine. We have spoken about this before, that the right brain tends to be connected with and thought of as our feminine connection, our feminine brain, our feminine mind governs the left side of our body, and the left brain is connected to the right side of our body. So we've actually got this crossover, and that tends to be the masculine. So overall is this need for balance. But what this saw was this wave brought with it is a reawakening of the feminine qualities through the right brain. So here we see, and we have seen since the 90s, late 90s, and especially probably in the last decade, the rise of goddess movements. You know, it's like goddess this and feminine that, and, you know, sort of new wave of the feminine standing up in their rising power and standing up for themselves. The hashtag Me Too movement that we've seen in recent years is another example of this. So it's a continuation of things that the suffragettes and what have you did years ago when they fought to get women the vote. This is now taking it one step further, where women are actually almost demanding more recognition in respect of equality. But that's not equality in the corporate world, which means you act like a man and you get paid like a man. It's actually a recognition of the qualities that the feminine and the female form actually bring into that masculine world in order to support the rebalancing. So there's a huge amount going on in respect of the rising female feminine power as a consequence of this wave. So we see it, you know, all over the place, even down to the recognition of appreciating the feminine aspects of in all genders, across all genders. So we see the acceptability and the rise of the LGBTQ movement, for instance, and that in and of itself is an appreciation of those feminine qualities that are actually coming through those individuals, and vice versa. So we also see, along with this, the same way as we are polarized in our own brains, we have a global brain, we have a planetary brain. So we see that there is a polarization in the planetary brain, which actually shifts the emphasis from the West to the East. And this is also really interesting because traditionally we have associated civilization with the rise and the strengthening of the West. And the West is actually holding on to its prime position like for dear life at the moment, to the best of its ability. But the emphasis and the focus is actually shifting to the East. So what do we see? Actually, we see a hell of a lot of manufacturing processes actually shifting to Eastern countries where they have been rising in power. So exactly the same way as the female and the feminine has actually been rising in power, so we see that economically as well. There is an irony in that I'll talk about shortly. But we also see the awakening of the East, and that as the transfer of Eastern-based cultures, spiritual understandings, ancient practices out of the East, whether that's Asia, India, whether it's China, whether it's Japan, making its way and infiltrating the West. So we see the rise of a lot of the Eastern spiritualities becoming an aspect of what we are doing in the West. So we do see this actually happening on a planetary basis, and it is absolutely necessary in order to balance what many people are afraid of is the Chinese, Russian superpowers because of their human rights records. What happens if they actually become almighty and all-powerful? And in fact, lots of people have said, you know, China's taking over the world. They've been investing in all sorts of currencies, in precious metals, and yet they do have very shocking human rights track records. So that is something that is going to need to be worked out. But this transfer of power and this rising of power actually has to happen in order to re-equalize ultimately on a global level, on a global basis, because they've originally been closed off. You know, what they were doing in their own little closed off environment. We're getting to the 9th wave now where there's no filters. So all of those boundaries and barriers actually have to fall down. in that respect. So what we saw with the eighth wave, and in fact, one thing that Carl Kalleman mentions in the book is that on the fifth day of each wave, we actually see the emergence of very significant new technologies, or new creations, civilizations, whatever it might be. On the fifth day of the eighth wave, which was 2007, we actually saw the introduction of the iPhone. And that, of course, that revolutionized cell phone technology and communications again, because that became integrated with the Apple Mac, with the iPads and iPods and all of that happening as a consequence of the iPhone introduction in 2007, quite massive. And then, of course, in the down cycle, which was the following year, so it would be the fifth night in 2008, we saw the recession, which essentially started at the end of 2007. And became full-blown in 2008. So in those even years, we actually hit the nighttime, the night cycle of each of the wave, and we're heading into a night cycle 2020 of the eighth wave. So Rachel says, I think we tend to attempt to figure out what might happen in the future based on our knowledge of the past. The ninth wave will create a world we have yet to imagine. Well said, Rachel. That is exactly it. So that's why being in that place of I don't know is actually a very powerful place to be, because that allows for the infiltration of the new holograms, and of different ways of thinking and of different possibilities. Our tendency, because we were born into the earlier waves, and especially the seventh wave, is to want to try and control our environment and to have that degree of certainty, as said earlier. And that is just, it's not going to happen, and it's not part and parcel of where we are going to and what we are creating with this and the ninth wave, specifically with the ninth wave. So there you have an overview of the eighth wave. It's quite huge in respect of the implications on our world, and I just actually love that. It's like nature, and there's the big eye that actually is just part and parcel, that watches and is ever present, the eye of the mystery, the eye of the divine, the eye. If any of you have had some really intense mystical experiences, the one thing that I always see when I have one of those real mind-blowing experiences is this huge eye. You know, it always pops in. So it's like we walk towards the eye of destiny, which is ultimately the eye of the divine, what lies behind, what lies beyond, just like the image. So let's have a look at the gifts of the eighth wave. Because, of course, every wave has its gifts and it has its challenges. So with the eighth wave, we see varied manifestations. So there's loads of possibilities. It's a high frequency and rapid change. So it's filled with potential. Huge potential, because we're accessing realms of the imagination that we just have not been able to access before, you know, because our brains have developed through the previous waves to bring us to this point. So even though the right brain is open, it's a different perception and has a different perceptual capacity than the open brains of the fifth wave, for instance, the light on the whole brain of the fifth wave. So we've moved forward. So yes, there are potentials and opportunities that we're seeing that we just have never been able to see before. Advancements of the Eastern Asian superpowers and contributions to the global economy. And that's a positive thing. You know, it's inclusive, it's interconnected. We're very fond of saying we're all one, but I don't want, I don't want the Chinese to be influenced, or I don't want this, or I don't want the, sort of Asians or the Russians in my country, immigration, close the borders down, all of the rest of it. However, these particular superpowers have contributed to our lives by enabling us to access goods and materials much more cheaply as well, because the labor force has actually been cheaper. Now, there's a lot of stuff that we can talk about that too, in respect of the detriment that has had. But let's, for the moment, just honor the advancements of those countries as the superpowers that they are and the contributions that they have made to our lives and economy. Migration of Eastern spiritual practices to the West. So we opened up all of our concepts and ideas of Qigong, of Tai Chi, of yoga, of, you know, we saw in the 80s, the late 80s as well, all of those Asian gurus going over to America. The fact that so many of them then became fallen teachers as a consequence of their behaviors is another story. You know, they took advantage, and you hear stories of their sexual exploits and unethical practices, etc., etc. However, what it did do was that it opened us up to a great many of the spiritual teachings that have become integrated into our own understanding of the spiritual. So it's a very powerful movement that actually took place in a powerful opening. It's favorable to women, and that's been political, educational, and in the corporate field. We still have what you might think of as the glass ceiling, where women can't progress any further because they're seen as emotional, because the old guard and the patriarchal system is still holding on to the old systems. And wanting the systems to operate and function in the same way that they always did. So, but we have, and we do see the emergence of women in political positions, you know, whereas it used to be a strictly male-dominated environment. So I just want to have a look here. We've got a comment in the chat room. It's easy to condemn the human treatment of countries that have very different cultures to ours, and yet we ignore the awful things our own countrymen commit. Yeah, well said, Rachel. That is exactly it. We do, you know, sort of we cast judgments, and those judgments will ultimately come to bear when the oppressed within those countries recognize their power and begin to rise up. So it's a process. You know, perhaps in the West, you know, because of the strength of the earlier waves that are rising, and that rising up is actually happening at the moment, that is going to happen as part of a natural progression. Look at what we're seeing in Hong Kong at the moment with the uprisings and their return back to Chinese, mainland China. And the Chinese autocratic rule. So that's going to be, it's very interesting to watch. So the youth at the moment are actually fueling a lot of the uprisings and shifts and changes. And, you know, our world can change in ways that we don't even anticipate as a consequence of these new holograms and actions that are taking place. So yeah, there we have. Favorable to women, political, educational, corporate. Long way to go, but there's been huge strides forward that have been made. Reawakening to the divine, recognition of the spiritual component to life. Absolutely huge. This was when it started happening, from the late sort of mid-80s onwards, certainly the late 90s, it has been massive. It's kind of like blown wide open. And that's when you see it getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. We see it all over the world. 1997, 98 was my big awakening, and I have seen so much of it since then. And very, very interestingly, what literally happened, I mean, I came out of a corporate environment, is that when I went through that awakening because of the light that switched on in the right brain, I literally couldn't use my left brain properly for quite some time. So it's like I had to leave corporate because I couldn't function anymore in that environment. So my left brain actually did go dark, and that happens to many people who go through a massive awakening, or they end up with this conflict between the two, and they can actually suppress their own awakening. It's a process. Really important. So yeah, recognition of the spiritual component to life in whichever way that's actually been expressed. It's cosmic, expansive, multidimensional, highly intuitive, beautiful, because for the first time now we're allowing that natural intuition to infiltrate our decisions, our choices, our actions, our behaviors in all spheres and all walks of life. You know, there's a recognition amongst corporate managers as well of the intuitive component to managing and leading. So very valuable in that respect. So advanced LGBTQ recognition and rights, huge movement. It started off as just the LBG communities. It's now become the transgender and queer communities as well. So all of those minority groups there's an awakening to the innate rights of human beings by virtue of you being a human being alive on this planet, irrespective of race, gender, creed, religion, or any of those influences, sexual orientation, all of those classifications. It's kind of like dropping the identification and the labels in a sense in order to open up acceptability. Definitely more holistic thinking coming out of the left-brained patriarchy. Holistic meaning interconnected. Okay, being able to connect the dots and see links with things in a different way that is not linear. The right brain does not operate in a linear fashion at all. We know that. It actually sees patterns. So where I'm talking holistic thinking, I'm talking about interconnections and patterns, being able to see the complexity of life in respect of the patterning. So it's dot connecting, etc. Very eclectic spiritual thinking, especially in Europe and the Northern Hemisphere. So yeah, that's where we saw the right brain light switched on very, very strongly, and lots of different interpretations of what it means to be spiritual. Some religious, some not religious, some doctrines, some dogmas, some no dogmas, some no boundaries, some whatever it might be. There's an eclectic mix of interpretations that have actually opened up. So it's a real melting pot to choose from. Mainly driven by women. And there's no one right way of doing things. And that's the essence. So it's about relativism as opposed to being absolute with anything. The left brain makes things absolute. The right brain makes things relative. So it's relativism. So I've noticed how I now have friends from different countries. Yes, and that's as a consequence of the digitalization of our environment and the opening up and the connecting with people in many different ways. Yeah, thank you. So benefits, gifts, greater appreciation of the feminine qualities in all genders. As we said, still a long way to go, and it is happening. More direct, the focus has been on more direct spiritual experiences, personal, as opposed to the middlemen. So you don't have to go through a priest, you don't have to go through an intermediary. Originally, I think what was happening, and it still does to a large extent, the infiltration of this spiritual business field still wants to drive the models forward on the basis of the old thinking, where the teacher or the guru is the middleman. You come to me for your wisdom. I'm not here giving you your wisdom. I'm here sharing some of the dots that have been connected, some of the patterns that I have seen, so that you can take that information and utilize it to make sense of your life. So that it becomes meaningful, because meaning is only ever attributed from our own perspective, from our internal experiences with whatever knowledge we have been given. So yeah, this is about empowering individuals ultimately to become their own priest, their own guru, their own teacher through the process. That's the ultimate goal of the eighth wave, direct experiences. Opened up to channeling, cosmic connections, greater novelty, and a plethora of spiritual teachings. We know good and bad. There's gifts in the channelings. Absolutely. The fact that there's been a lot of distortion that's actually come in to many of the channeled messages is another story. However, it has actually brought us a lot of insight and a great many gifts. So that is the connection to levels of multidimensionality beyond the physical form, mediumship, whatever it might be. Resurgence of natural healing processes. So we actually do see the recognition that we are more than just flesh and bone, that we are essentially waveform constructs. That is growing in understanding and growing in wisdom. That when we access the waveforms within ourselves, we can actually and change our thinking, because our thoughts are a waveform construct. Then we can actually shift and change the construct of our own bodies, and initiate healing. We can work with others to hold space and emanate an energy that unfolds them, helps them to initiate their own healing and to wake them up. So there's a massive movement in respect of appreciating the complementary methods of natural healing. Herbs, you know, people now communicating with plants, interspecies communication. So we're not only talking about, you know, communication with the divine, we're talking about communication with other species on the planet, living species, because they are all manifestations of the waveform. So people talk to plants and use plant medicine, and that's come back into vogue. Herbs, all of that kind of stuff. So it's a massive, massive upsurge and a massive gift that we've been given. And then interconnectivity due to the internet. Of course, we're all very, very familiar with the way that the internet has almost taken over so much of our lives just in the recent past, just in the last 2 decades. You know, I mean, that growth has been tremendous, enormous. The ability to disseminate teachings actually using the internet, exactly as we're doing at the moment. In the last 2 decades, we saw the rise of the telesummits, you know, where people were actually building lists and pulling in people from all over the world in their tens and hundreds of thousands in order to share teachings. And it's really fueled the awakening in such a massive and very powerful way. So yeah, it's something that continues to build in amazing ways as this wave presence actually strengthens. So that's not going to go away. Challenges of the 8th wave. So this is quite interesting here in that there are quite a lot of challenges that come along with this wave, along with the gifts. What we've seen is conflicts in Eastern and Middle Eastern countries where there has been a kickback against women. So while we see on a planetary basis from the global mind that we have this shift from west to east, which is the same as this rising feminine, so we've got this shift in power, the autocratic systems that were in place and remain in place in many of the Eastern and Middle Eastern countries perceived this as a threat within their own environments, that this has created even greater kickbacks against women. It's almost like a pendulum swing, a kickback against the influences of the 8th wave. So in fact, many of the women are probably suffering more now than what they previously did as a consequence of this almost clamp down. However, that is again part of the process, because when you put them under pressure and they put under intense pressure, sooner or later that pressure cooker has to release whatever is building up inside of it. And they are subjected as much to the influences of the 8th wave and the right brain as any of us anywhere else in the world. So that pressure is actually building up. So that's going to fuel change and awareness in its own time. So important to recognize that. The past decade has seen men feeling lost and uncertain of their purpose. Absolutely, it's this demasculinization, where the only thing that's important now is the feminine, and that's not the case. It's really, really important that we hold balanced perspective and discernment and appreciation for all things masculine in respect of the energetics through this period. As part of they're a balancing, that energy is a balancing force that helps to ground us and integrate us. And without that, we're at risk of spiraling out of control and spiraling mental illness. So that's part of the, they are part of the boundaries that actually need to be put in place. So I'll cover a little bit later. So challenges: widening economic gap and inequality due to digitalization. We spoke about that earlier. This is happening. If you watch the movie, that documentary, The Four Horsemen, that I actually mentioned in one of the earlier discussion groups, one of the earlier episodes of this, you will get a feel and an understanding for that. And that economic gap is widening. What is required and what is needed is a brand new system that redistributes wealth around the planet in a very different and equitable way. Because those that don't have money have no means of actually acquiring it within the framework of the current systems. Social mobility and everything that they talk about is pure nonsense. Trickle-down effect, rubbish. The system is designed to siphon funds out of the system upwards. It's not designed to send the funds downwards. So massive change that's needed, declining economic opportunities. Carl Kalaman actually believes that there's another recession that's actually coming, and hopefully that would be the trigger for some massive change in our economic systems. Inadequate education system for eighth wave children and different learning needs. Just touching on what we went through with the contributions of the eighth wave and the fact that it is highly image-based and highly visual gives us an indication straight away of the way in which children who are born into the eighth wave paradigm and holograms would be requiring different ways of inputting and learning based on that. So the old linear system of thinking that we've been trying to impose on them is not serving them in respect of education. That's why I think so many kids are actually getting even more and more stressed through the exam process. You know, take it in and remember it and regurgitate it. Well, the right brain doesn't do that. It's the left brain that actually holds on to it, that builds the linear if this then that issues, and give me an answer in the way that I taught you. Don't just give me an answer because you actually know it, which is right brain stuff and able to see patterns, because then that doesn't count. It's placing huge stress on children. So yeah, massive need for shifts in the education system. And that's why I think if more people actually understood the influences and what's happening at the moment, we would begin to see a lot of that. And I think there are changes that are beginning to come through. So we have an overwhelming pace of change. So there's not enough time to properly ground and integrate. And that's a challenge. We have to create that space and time for ourselves in order to be able to do that, or also learn to integrate almost on the go, acting in flow, being able to stabilize on quicksand, which is a really interesting concept to bear in mind. 6th and 7th wave holograms are still operational, with systems inadequate to deal with 8th wave influences. So we still have the corporate, we still have the financial, political, legal, justice systems. All of those are operating on the basis of 6th and 7th wave holograms. They're very, very much effective in governing our lives, and they are inadequate to deal with the 8th wave needs and influences. So there's going to be, and there's going to have to be, a breakdown. Plus, they're struggling exactly the same way in effect that, you know, sort of the economics are siphoning money out of the system. So it's going to lead us to quite possibly smaller community-based initiatives in our local environment with local groups that are interconnecting in a different way to be able to live in a completely different way. You know, and some of the things that we see are not necessarily bartering systems, but bartering systems don't always work. They will only work if you are exchanging something of value to both parties. You know, and there's a lot of people who've gone into this and said, you know, I'll swap you a yoga session for a pack of cards or whatever. And you're kind of going, but I don't really want a yoga session. And I've actually, you know, it's cost me money to get those printed. So I actually need something in exchange that actually has value to me. So you get people trying to impose a bartering system where there's no recognition of two-sided value because it's very much the I-based self-authoring of the 8th wave. I hope that's making sense. I'm really just rattling a lot of this off. It's kind of like flowing through as I'm talking. But what we see in places like Todmorden and certain towns, and it's happening on a small scale at the moment, I think it might just catch on, is we see residents planting vegetables in public spaces, planting fruit trees, so that anybody, irrespective of who they are, has access to food. And that to me is critical It is really important in respect of the shifting, changing environment. There's a hospital in Boston, I think, that I saw as well, where they've actually created a whole roof garden, an organic roof garden, where they're growing organic vegetables that's used for the patients in the hospital. I thought, what an excellent idea. These wonderful, wonderful ideas, they're part and parcel of the eighth wave hologram. So there's a lot more that I think will emerge and is beginning to emerge as a consequence of the evolution and the downloads and the perceptual abilities of this. Okay, so that's a benefit in order to counteract some of the challenges that we're seeing. Challenges are also addiction to digital technology and the changes that are taking place in the brain. So we do actually see almost this, this interaction where the entire focus is on the digital technology. And in children, especially where they're developing brains at an earlier age, that the addiction to technology is actually even stronger than opioid addiction. It's stronger than heroin. So huge, huge influences, and it needs to be balanced by time spent in a natural environment. You know, sort of limiting time on devices, especially at the earlier developmental ages when the brain is actually still growing. So growing awareness of that as an issue. Transhumanism trends, that's really connected with this, being connected with the digital world, this movement towards transhumanism and the blending of the human being with the machine through implementation of chips and control and et cetera, which basically dehumanizes us as individuals and puts all of the power in the machine. So it's an eighth wave idea fueled by a seventh wave industrial hologram. So you can see how the interference of the two waves, of the eighth wave and the seventh wave, has come up with something that's really novel, but that doesn't serve humanity. So this is where we actually really need to be very discerning in respect of the new ideas, because it's in those transition zones where you get the overlapping of waves that these great creative ideas actually come in. So we have disregarding the physical in favor of the spiritual. That's also, as mentioned earlier, one of the challenges of the eighth wave. So it's like the only thing that's important is connecting with out there and meditating and talking to Metatron and talking to the angels and whatever it might be. So there's been, and there are a lot of trends in that regard, where the physical world doesn't have the same degree of appeal as the novelty and the mysteries of the multidimensional world. So Rachel's just said here, I think that's what I really enjoy from this, Julie, is understanding how they cross over and the transition. Yeah, thank you for that, Rachel, because that's what I find, is that as I'm pulling it together, I'm seeing a lot of those areas of conflict and things that Carl doesn't necessarily talk about in his book, with the implications of some of these things. So that's where I hope this is also of infinite value to everybody, is providing some of that perspective and the bigger influences, some of the broader influences and things that we need to be aware of. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing. So, oh, sorry. Overwhelm of spiritual experience. Now, this can happen with the awakening, and this is also very much something to be aware of. Oh, that's lovely. Thank you, Rachel. That would be interesting to maybe send it through to Carl, so that he would benefit from your information. And maybe there is a wonderful opportunity to share. I'll maybe get in touch with him. Thank you for that. The overwhelm of spiritual experience through the opening up of the right brain. And I know a lot of people who've been through this with what they call Kundalini awakening. If the body is not prepared, the nervous system is not prepared, and you suddenly start going pop and it opens up. It can, and it has, in certain individuals, and a number of individuals, led to transcendental psychoses. And there is a lack of discernment. I was talking about the psychic landscape in the earlier slide. This is really what we're talking about, opening up to that psychic landscape so suddenly without the understanding, without the training. And this is what the eighth wave hologram is actually bringing us, is opportunity to awake. But when it's done sort of like that, it's really, really difficult for individuals without the knowledge to get taken in by wacky teachings, by people who don't know what they're talking about, by somebody who woke up 2 years ago who thinks that they know it all, and is sort of transferring inadequate, ungrounded, and incorrect teachings. And it can actually lead to a complete lack of discernment. I've got a few more things in a future slide as well about that. But it can lead to psychotic type breaks, experiences of psychosis that need to be adequately managed. And that is something that the psychiatric environment, the medical environment perhaps needs to be aware of, and we need to be aware of people who are actually going through this, and be aware of be aware of the signs that this is happening with individuals. So yes, the overwhelm of spiritual experiences can actually lead to an overload of the nervous system, and psychotic type breaks. To some extent, we have seen this as well, that there is an absolving of personal responsibility. It's a childlike focus on fun, play, and bliss. So it's like not grown-up spiritual concepts. It's very, very childlike. All you need to do is to play with the energies. Let's play. It should all be fun. It should all be joyful. It should all just be fun. Life isn't like that. Life is a marriage of all of it, and life isn't always fun. Life has challenges. Life can be painful. Life is messy. Let's not mince our words. Life is messy, and it can be. But being able to navigate that with a firm foundation and sense and understanding of the fact that life is unfolding under a supreme guiding force that is patterning ourselves and patterning our lives and enabling us to become stronger from it, is a very, very different perspective, rather than this, it must just be fun. If it's not fun, I'm not doing it. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that out there. So it's a real lack of grounding. I've had a few people actually blank me on some of those issues when I've spoken about them before, who just insist that everything must be fun. Okay, so ungroundedness can lead to disappointment in the efficacy of systems of teaching. So what I'm talking about here, that ungroundedness in respect of spiritual foundations and understanding, that ungroundedness can actually lead to disappointment in not receiving the guidance or the promised mastery or whatever somebody else has promised us. This is this externalization of mastery. Somebody else promised us that we will actually become, a master if we follow them or follow this teaching, and it will, you'll become a master or whatever. And of course it doesn't work, because we know that mastery comes from within. It's not external, it's internal. So we find a lot of disappointment, and ultimately what can happen is that individuals can almost fall back asleep. They can numb out to this realm. It doesn't work, it's not fun, therefore I'm not doing it, and essentially fall back asleep. So staying awake is really, really important as part and parcel of this. So I hope that is making sense for you all. Conflicts with authority. This is interesting, and it is part and parcel of the eighth wave, because as the feminine actually rises in power, it is coming into conflict with the old masculine implementation of authority. So we do actually find conflicts with authority, and this is something especially that we actually find with the millennials and the new children. So, and we find conflicts with authority in some of the foreign countries as well, and it's not always a bad thing, because if it's an externally imposed authority, what we are looking for, what people don't realize they're looking for very often, is they're looking for that internal authority, that deep, deep connection with the guiding force that is divine within us. That is our internal guiding authority. So as a result, we actually generate and create conflicts with external authorities in our search for that, or in our journey towards that. So a very interesting consequence and a challenge of the eighth wave is that that's what happens. The only problem is if it's not done with the right awareness and with discernment, it just becomes being rebellious for the sake of being rebellious. Rebel without a cause kind of thing, because that's the energy that is actually surfacing within them, and they need somewhere to channel the energy. It gets put out there externally as conflict and challenge of authority. Limitlessness without boundaries, and this is also something that I'll talk about a little bit later on as well, when it comes to the understanding the Aquarian age and the Aquarian concepts, because that is about the limitless mind. Limitless possibilities, limitless potentials, but no boundaries. So when it comes to raising children in that environment, and we keep telling them they can be, do, have whatever they want, and be whoever they want to be, and it's like no limits, no limits, no limits. Very, very often that parenting style refuses to establish some kind of firm boundary for their children in order to balance that limitlessness. And without the boundaries in place, we then do not know how to manage our own boundaries if we're not taught about those boundaries at an early age. So we do see, a lot of the children coming through the eighth wave, i.e. the millennials as well, who are challenging, who are rebellious, who feel entitled, because of this whole concept and this whole idea, because those boundaries have not been put in place, and because of the influence of the culture. So it is a real challenge with the children to move on from this. So I hope that makes sense. Have anybody got any comments or questions on that slide with the insights there? Sorry, I'm just going to have a quick drink of tea. Are we really at that time already? My. Okay, let's move on. So what we have here, tools for staying awake. I love this. Sorry, I just love this quote here. That knowledge is knowing tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is knowing not to put it in fruit salad. It pulls together what we're seeing in our own lives. That was always my intention for this, and that goes back to that quote that I gave early on in the program as well, about understanding, because understanding liberates us from the wheel that keeps us perpetuating some of those patterns and gives us the opportunity to actually make a different decision and to do things in a different way, with awareness, with consciousness. Excuse me. Oh, can you guys hear me? Better now. Okay, that's good. Thank you. Okay. So what I was saying is, I actually love this quote on this slide. So knowledge is knowing that tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. So really what we're on a journey towards is the integration of understanding as wisdom. So some of the tools for staying awake, because as I said, things don't seem to work, or we get caught up in these psychoses or whatever, we can actually numb out. We numb out emotionally because it's just total overwhelm. And we go back to sleep. So we just actually shut down, but then we shut down emotionally, and we shut down to possibilities, and we shut down to potential. So staying awake, we need to work with left-right brain coordination and connection to maintain perspective, because we need a functioning left brain that can also reason and support us in anchoring and grounding this information, in translating things into wisdom, translating experiences to give us a holistic meaning, that it's not just a meaning that somebody else gives us, or a meaning that's interpreted using one half of our brain. We actually need both. And this is something I've actually said for years, that I'm really concerned, because I was seeing it out there in the spiritual environment, is that that people were not thinking. You know, they're just accepting. They're just accepting what's repeated and repeated and repeated by other people without necessarily questioning and coming to a meaning for themselves and a wisdom. So we need a balance of intuitive and learned understanding, and that requires discipline. With the right brain, there is no discipline. That's exactly it. It's limitless. Discipline implies boundaries. We need boundaries for our behavior in order to be disciplined. So that's a powerful tool that we can actually use. So you said people go, okay, well, I don't have time to meditate and I can't do this. Now, 5 minutes, do 5 minutes a day. That's a discipline. It helps you to put down boundaries in respect of your time and other people pulling on your time and so on and so forth. So really, really important to do this. Ensure time to integrate new learning. So don't just go out there. And what happens as well, and you see it so often, is that somebody opens up. You have this awakening. Somebody opens up to potential that's beyond the physical, and they become the seeker. And it's really, really exciting. I did it myself. You go out there and it's like new course after course after course, learning after learning after learning. I did color therapy and metaphysical healing and Reiki and spiritual healing and you name it, and Antonia body work and this and that. And I did all sorts of stuff, and it was just going from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. Eventually, it got to a point where I was starting to burn out because there was not enough time to integrate the learnings. And my teacher at the time actually said to me, stop, go pick up a Mills and Boon book. Go and pick up a novel, go and sit and just read it. Ragmag. Stop with all the books. I mean, I've got a library of books I've been collecting for years. Stop with all of the books that you want to learn from and go and pick up a novel and go and sit, because that's when the integration actually starts. And of course, I didn't listen, you know, but that's something that we can support those who are awakening. And if any of you here have actually found yourself on that same treadmill, be very cautious and take that teaching from experience, because otherwise your nervous system literally burns out because it overrides its capacity to integrate the information. Balance technological dependence with time in natural environments. We know that that's a golden rule, you know, about sort of balancing, but it's actually working with both and understanding the value of both and valuing both equally. Hug a tree, go pick some flowers, go and stare at a flower, whatever it might, go for a walk in the woods, whatever it might be. But ensure that you balance that, and for your children, technological dependence with time in a natural environment. Absolutely imperative for this. Mindfulness, the mindfulness practices and disciplines, invaluable, because that brings our attention into the now. It brings our attention into what is it that my body and I need right now. So any mindfulness exercises, and of course, Bonnie has written a book which is absolutely wonderful, Bonnie and Jan, called Heart Thoughtful Mindfulness, and it is strategies for parents and children. So it's equally as valuable for adults, and she's got a new book coming out. So I would highly recommend it. And any mindfulness practice, very, very practical insights and strategies. So yeah. There you have it. Spiritual attentiveness to avoid complacency. So that's Katie saying, that's why I find the need to balance with my artwork. Absolutely, Katie, that makes perfect sense. Yes, yeah. Paintings, something with your hands. Do something with your hands or with your body. Dance. Go and do a pottery class. I once did a candle making class. Absolutely loved it. Just go and do something like that. Take some time out from all of this stuff to do some really practical stuff, not meditating necessarily, practical physical stuff that engages your physical body. Yeah, we can become spiritually complacent. This is the, you know, also the bit about falling asleep, you know, going back to sleep rather than staying awake. And don't become complacent with our spiritual practices. Okay, I know it all. You know, I've had a couple of really peak experiences and now I know it. We never know. We're a constant work unfolding. Do physical energy practices to build the mind-body connection, Tai Chi, Qigong, Yoga, Nia, etc., etc. That speaks for itself. Be a bit cautious about these. I'm more inclined towards Tai Chi and Qigong than yoga at the moment, because yoga has taken over. Pilates is also excellent. Yoga as an Eastern discipline has taken over the Western world. And in doing so, what it has become is another method of actually imposing control. And it's become an ego-based system to see how far people can push their bodies. The number of yoga injuries since yoga was actually introduced to the West is phenomenal, because people push their bodies into all of the pretzel-like configurations without the discipline and the years that so many people have put into it. People actually contort themselves, have pulled muscles, sustained back injuries, sustained all sorts of stuff. And when the ego gets a hold of those things. So really important. Doesn't mean that yoga's bad. It just means be aware, because now you've got hot yoga and the this yoga and the that yoga and the next yoga. It's become another manifestation of the self-authored eighth wave environment. Develop trust in your intuition by acting on your inner guidance. Really, really powerful. Nia is dancing, but it is actually based on also very fluid movements. And there are teachers who hold Nia classes. You know, you can go there to a dance class. So it's not heavy Zumba or Rumba, all of those. If that's what you want, you know, then go for that. Nia is a very flowing movement. So it's almost like a bit of a cross, I suppose, between Tai Chi and dance. It's just really beautiful. I've heard from a lot of people. I've never done it. I know someone who's a Nia teacher, but it's really beautiful. So keep your eye open. Develop trust in your intuition. This, you know, I say this over and over again to people all the time. And we know this, Developing trust in your intuition means taking each little impulse and just making that small move in the direction that that energy wants to take you. So it's listening to the intuitive impulses, allowing those to actually guide you forward and to guide your steps in life. Because the more you do that, the greater your level of trust, the more that that spiritual stream becomes part of a daily, moment by moment, mindful action taking process. Okay. Practice discernment and question prevailing memes. Really important, because the memes that are going around, many of you will have heard me going off about this, so I'm not going to go into them in detail. I have got a slide with some of the memes. But practice asking questions. Don't just, the right brain just accepts what it's given. The left brain questions and requires an explanation. You know, and of course we get the right brain going, but you don't need explanations. You just have to accept the experience. You don't always need to know what it means. But that's then used as an excuse to be lazy and to not engage the left brain and to not actually question some of the things that we are receiving. And therefore we get repeaters and repeated memes that are incorrect, that are fantasy memes in the spiritual game. And that is actually what's happened. So in respect of staying awake, that's one thing that would always say to you is ask questions. If it's asking me questions, you know, so please do. That's why I always open up and say, please ask questions, because it helps us all to learn and to understand. It's only through the asking questions and the discernment that we really develop the deeper understanding and perspective and meaning. So there are some of the tools and ideas for staying awake and the reasons why it's actually so important. So what is a meme? We hear this word bandied around now. In fact, it's become part of the culture, part of the language of the eighth wave culture. The eighth wave hologram is this whole process of memes. And in fact, the spread of memes is actually so much more efficient now because of the internet and because of the digitalization of media. So Rachel says, I noticed two prominent teachers speaking about the rise in the Schumann resonance yesterday, and I'm sure it rose in frequency. It rose in hertz, yes. Absolutely, that's what it's doing, and it's our consciousness that's causing it. So they actually designed the story, the narrative, to actually fit the conclusion, which is actually an incorrect assumption in the first place. Yeah. Thanks for that, Rachel. Yeah, you know, now you know why I get bees him up on it. But anyway, what's a meme? What's a meme? A meme is an idea, a behavior, or style that spreads from person to person within a culture, often with the aim of conveying a particular phenomenon, theme, or meaning represented by the meme. Also often referred to as a mind virus. So it used to take a long time for memes to become embedded within cultures. Nowadays, it's like if it becomes a viral sensation on the internet, see, we call it a virus, viral sensation, it's gone viral. It's a meme that's had a massive influence on the thinking processes and on the culture. So another way of defining it is a piece of media, often humorous, that spreads rapidly throughout the internet. So I just picked out two of them that I thought were really cute. They said I could be anything, so I became adorable. That's a meme. Okay, and that meme will have done the rounds. That's one of the ones that's actually out there as a published meme. Here's another one: conserve, there is no planet B, which is a wonderful take on that whole don't worry if plan A doesn't work, there's always plan B. There is no planet B. Okay, so we really need to take care of the planet that we have. That's a new meme. That's a cultural meme, and that's inspiring a lot of the youth at the moment. So now we see them talking about climate change and the need to change our ways and change our ideas, etc., etc. So you kind of get the concept of the memes and the ideas. So let's have a look at some of the memes that a lot of you guys know about, but memes that have infiltrated the spiritual community. And sometimes those memes are just not based on anything except the right brain and any evidence to the contrary. What doesn't matter because physics hasn't caught up yet. But anyway, so here's a meme. I've heard this meme since 1997. That we have 12-stranded DNA, which is busy recomposing itself, and it is scientific fact that we have another new strand. Now, I have heard reputable teachers use those exact words. It is scientific fact that we are rebuilding the 12 strands and that we have another new strand. That is a meme that's taken hold and is repeated and repeated and repeated. And in fact, when I did the research on it, it is based on nothing but a lay article, not a scientific article. It was an article by somebody who is not scientific, who was talking about an extra arm on a chromosome, which is still composed of 2 strands of DNA. It is not an extra strand of DNA. It is an extra arm on a chromosome, the same way that you have things like Down syndrome and other syndromes manifest through tags or attachments on the chromosomes themselves. It is not another strand, and it is not anywhere scientific fact that there is a 3rd strand of DNA. So there you get assumptions, and that's become a very, very well entrenched meme that is used by many, many teachers. So I would challenge you guys to question and be discerning. The fact about our DNA is that DNA is a waveform. The junk DNA acts as a language to actually inform the rest of the DNA in respect of what it needs to do. And as the language changes in accordance with the waves, our DNA is doing different things. Our DNA in and of itself, the 2 strands we have, is highly mobile, which means that it is, if you take one gene section, okay, one section of amino acids that make up what we used to think was one gene, is that all of the components in that section can reorganize themselves in so many different ways that one section can reorientate itself to make something like 200 different proteins. So there's not even such a thing as fixed genes in our DNA. And if one strand can do that and it can rearrange itself to make 200 different proteins, what is our 2-stranded, our humble 2-stranded DNA capable of doing. Huge, 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 huge. So no, 12-stranded DNA, wonderful meme, doesn't work. Assumptions. Reiki is a healing modality. Now, no, Rachel, you could actually have plenty to say as well. And Rachel and I have been working with the Diamond Light Reiki. That Reiki is a healing modality. Reiki is universal energy. Well-entrenched memes. We've been struggling with the Diamond Light Reiki to actually get the concept and the understanding across that is not Reiki, actually. The original intention of Reiki, once we've unfolded all of this stuff and gone past all of the assumptions that have been made and then perpetuated on the basis of that meme, is that Reiki is not. Reiki means true self. So it's not a healing modality, okay? Although it's been sold and marketed and shared as such. It's a deep-seated program. Yes, absolutely. It's a deep-seated program that has just been adopted. It become a meme. It's a very strong meme. The Schumann resonances are hitting higher Hertz levels. There we go. It's still prominent teachers. And I just got tired of actually putting comments on people's posts going, no, they're not. They're not. You're reading the charts wrong. It's incorrect. They're not reading higher Hertz levels. Nope. Do your work, you know. And because people don't want to listen. They've made an assumption. They've made that the meme, and they just keep perpetuating the meme. This is the danger of the eighth wave. They just accept what somebody else has told them because the thinking left brain is not switched on and doesn't have the capacity to reason and investigate and actually be able to see the bigger picture. Metatron says, that's a really big one. There's lots and lots of people going Metatron says. That's the externalization of authority. Externalization of mastery. I'm not the master, Metatron is, you know, and lots and lots of people, you know, I've been chosen as another one. I am humbly being chosen to be the channel for this one. Interesting how people attack when they challenge to think differently. Yes, haven't we experienced that? Absolutely. Become very, very defensive. Thank you, Rachel. Become very defensive when they are challenged with their existing memes. With these memes, because that's all it is. It's a mind virus. So it's a virus that's actually infiltrated, and there's no antibiotics for this one, as we were actually saying earlier. The antibiotic for this is actually the truth in the left brain. Well, I say the truth, but it's actually opening up the left brain in respect of providing some reasoned faculties. So yeah, there's a meme, Metatron. You could substitute Metatron for whoever else says. You create your own reality. That's a meme that actually started in the 90s. It came about with The Secret, even prior to that, and it's become persistent. You create your own reality, your reality. So we're not living in an agreed reality, a collaborative reality. You create your own reality. And in essence, we create our experience through our perceptual lens. We don't create the events necessarily that happen to us, because all of those events are part of a collaborative, agreed reality that we are living within. We are still embedded within a collective reality. So we are actually co-creating. But that meme is persistent. That meme is persistent. So anything that goes wrong in your life, well, it's your fault because you created it. Lack of compassion, lack of heart. In all of those perceptions. Spaceship Earth, that's quite a good one. I rather like that meme. You know, we are, if you really think about it, we're on a planet that's actually spiraling through the solar system like a spaceship, not through the galaxy, trailing behind the sun. So it's just like a spaceship, satellite. So literally we are, you know, sort of Spaceship Earth. We're a spaceship in the middle of this vast cosmos. 5D Earth is another meme. I always say, well, what's 5D? What does it mean? What does it mean? You know, and people don't really have a reasoned understanding or an explanation of what 5D Earth actually really means. New Earth. New Earth I can understand in respect of the language of the waves and understanding the wave holograms, because we are creating a new Earth. The holograms and the means of being able to do that are here. Ascension is another meme, you know, that caught on. Instead of us expanding our understandings and evolving through the process, the ascension meme took hold. So we are ascending, and this is the ascension. It's not that we ascended through each of the other, you know, sort of previous waves. It's just that this is it and we're ascending, kind of thing. So you ask people, if you had to question that, it'd be interesting to see what answers they come up with. I never resonated with this concept of 5D. Because to me, we are multidimensional beings, and we're expanding into that multidimensional space that we actually cannot confine and cannot define, because we don't have the fullness of those ninth wave holograms yet. So we're and we are still physical beings. You know, we're not going from 3D to 5D because we live. We are formed. We operate through these vehicles, these bodies that function in a third dimensional, three-dimensional form and environment. So we're not going anywhere. We're just expanding our essence through the body. Yeah, I'm a starseed. These definitions, labels. I'm a starseed, light worker, grid worker. Okay. All right, then. We've all been there. I also did that. You know, I'm a light worker. I'm a, you know, starseed, and I came from the Pleiades and what have you. You get to a point where their label actually makes no difference. What's important? What's important is actually being able to anchor the teachings that are actually received. It doesn't matter whether you're from Sirius or Arcturus or Andromeda or wherever it might be. You know, what matters is that we are here. We are here on the planet. Those labels very often then get attached to those who are still out there with the right brain. Okay. And ungrounded. Because once you start grounding and integrating, you realize that those labels actually mean nothing. I was talking to a friend about this recently because we were together when we went through the whole Pleiadian thing about 20 years ago. And it was really, we had such a giggle. You know, we just had to laugh at the way that each of us, you know, we'd both really bought into this whole thing, you know, that we were Pleiadian and Sirian starseeds, you know, and that there was a message from the Pleiades and the Pleiadians or what have you. But it doesn't matter. They're all aspects of the same consciousness. They're all aspects of the divine consciousness. So it doesn't really matter what that origin actually is or what the label is you want to put with it. Anyway. So yeah, no, to be a starseed or a light worker somehow makes you special. There is a need in the eighth wave for that specialness. Self-authored, me, I am special. The age of Aquarius equals the golden age. And that's an interesting one because from the way that I actually see the qualities and aspects of Aquarius itself doesn't give you a golden age. Aquarius is just, it's an era and an age of limitless mind, which is really what we're talking about with the eighth wave. So it's opening up to potential and the potential for new ideas, which is very powerful, very positive. But in and of it, by themselves, that's not going to create a golden age. But somehow the age of Aquarius became that. And the age of Aquarius concept only connects with and is linked with the Northern Hemisphere. Age of Aquarius doesn't link with the Southern Hemisphere because that's based on 6-wave observations of the precession of the equinoxes from the Northern Hemisphere. So it's really, really interesting, you know, how that's become a very powerful meme. So let's have a quick look at the children born into, are we at 6:45 already? Oh, my goodness, sorry, yeah, this is like almost 2 hours. I just can't believe it again. Children born into the eighth wave. So these are really born from the 1980s onwards. This image, I think, encompasses so much of the essence of the children born into the eighth wave. They've attached and attracted a variety of labels. And it started off with the indigos. Suddenly there was somebody talking about how the auric fields of the children that were coming in were a different color, that they were indigo blue. So the auras had actually changed. They became known as the indigo. So suddenly it's my child's an indigo. That became a label to define their specialness. And it became an excuse for actually also not necessarily being a disciplinarian, for allowing them to explore their intuitiveness, because that's one of the qualities, and explore their connection, etc., and their creativity, etc., but without the discipline. So a lot of indigos in inverted commas grew up feeling actually very lost. It's very typical also. All of these qualities are aspects of what we might think of loosely as the group of millennials. Then suddenly the indigos became the crystal children. So now the auras are no longer blue, they're clear. And then the crystal children became the rainbow children. And the rainbow children were more special than the crystal children, were more special than the indigos, were more special than the ones before. And then we had people who were saying, well, they're now the diamond children. Okay, so we can think ninth wave, diamond energy and so on. But now it's degrees of specialness. It was actually put out there as well, these labels that implied a degree of specialness if you were identified as one of these children. If you are a child born upon this planet, you are special by pure virtue of the fact that you are here, that you exist. And this is the, Carolyn Miss actually has a lot to say about the labels on children. It's like, do away with them, because somebody had once asked her a question about indigos. She says, I refuse to answer it. Do away, get rid of the label, get rid of those labels. Every child actually is special by virtue of their presence on the planet. So all of these labels that have been used to define the new children, we need to be very aware of how and where they're applied. You know, now we get Reiki for indigo children and Reiki for diamond children, and it's just, need I say any more? Generation Y, they're also called, and now we've got them all grouped together as millennials. The one thing that is important and significant in respect of the children that have been born from the 80s onwards, I don't care about their auric colors or all of the rest of it, because I don't believe that they're permanently indigo, is that they are born with the light already open on the right brain. So they haven't had to learn to undo as much of the patterning as what we did in going through the awakening. That's why our awakening was very often so severe and intense. So they were born into that light. Oh, sorry, I've lost the presentation. I was just looking at the chat room. Sun is going down your end. We're losing you. Oh, can you not see me? Bear with me, as long as you can hear me talking. That's okay. I can't really open the blinds either to get a bit more light in unless I get it. If you can hold on for 2 minutes, I'll get up and I'll actually open the blinds just to let a bit more light in. Okay, hopefully that's a little bit better. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I hope you can hear me now. Sorry, I actually knocked the microphone connection as I sat back down. So hopefully all is back on track. For some reason, I can't get the chat room up. Never mind. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. So there is a recognition and an acknowledgement that these individuals and these children are born with a slightly different hologram already downloaded as a consequence of their entry into this world at that particular time. So they do have a different brain configuration and a different way of thinking as a consequence of this. Excuse me. So-called indigo children, perceived auric color change to predominant blue indigo color, are made to feel special. And as a consequence of this, there is a sense of entitlement. Think about the millennials. That's one of the things that's actually said about millennials, is that they have an inbuilt sense of entitlement. So this is something that was programmed as part of the indigo wave and the perceived labels of the indigo children. Confident and bordering on arrogance. very often, overly confident. This is how these children have been perceived. They have a sense of being emboldened by something larger than self, which makes sense because they're born with that connection, the right brain connection that's actually open. And if you have that without the discipline and the boundaries, that can lead to overconfidence and arrogance rather than just confidence of being. So we want to foster a child's confidence, but it needs to be within the constructs of societal. The word norms is not the right word, but I think you guys would know what I mean. What's acceptable in society. High expectations of self and others, which can actually be really interesting. Therefore, they can be exceptionally self-critical and judgmental. Perceptive and creative. It's exactly the same description for millennials. You'll actually see just now, perceptive and creative. Questioning of authority, rebels. So they're gonna kick out against authority. Not a bad thing, good and bad, depending on how and where it is actually applied, whether it's appropriate or not. They dislike rigid systems, which makes sense because you've got this limitless in respect of the mind. It's like, don't confine me, don't put me in a box. Discipline does not mean being put in a box. But that's where the educational system doesn't work, because the educational system is still a one-size-fits-all system that wants to put children into boxes. They can be a bit like lost souls, the rebels, the loners, and they battle to fit in. That's where you get, I never felt like I belonged anywhere. I don't really fit, because there's not that continuation of community. And also that, remember that they are born with this new insight, and they're born to parents who don't have that. So they don't fit in. And they won't feel as if they fit in. But part of their job is to actually be guided by that older generation, and also to help change those paradigms. They are often driven by an inner mission and purpose, passionate, fiery, and vocal, often highly psychic. And as a consequence of all of this frustrated energy and the fiery, passionate energy that wants to create, that can be exceptionally frustrated. So that can lead and lend itself to all sorts of circumstances. Autistic children, and this was really interesting looking at this also. I love this, always unique, totally interesting, sometimes mysterious, as an acronym for autism. That was really beautiful. So here we have a spectrum of neurodevelopmental disorders. And my sense, now this is just my sense, so I give it to you for what it's worth, is that the changes and the shifts in the functioning of the brain, sometimes the patterning that these children are born with, makes it exceptionally difficult to navigate this environment. It's not properly wired. So you get the millennials, those who are frustrated, and the sort of the so-called indigo children, those children, and then you get the autistic, those on the autistic spectrum, who are wired slightly differently, but as a consequence still of the same hologram. It's the same way that any hologram can play itself out in different ways because of the interference patterns. So this is my sense on this, is that the neurodevelopmental disorders associated with autism are a function of the interference patterns of the 8th wave holograms. These individuals, these children, experience sensory overwhelm. Sensory overwhelm, right brain. That's our access to all of our sensory experiences, whether it's sort of just the 5 senses and beyond. So it's right brain. Reduced eye contact and responsiveness to caregivers. That is an absolute overwhelm. So it's a retreat, not able to connect with the external world and with other individuals. Inability to ground or digest life. So this life that they are born into is not the life in a sense that they've been wired for. They require a different environment in order to be able to fully experience, or to experience life in a different way, or they need to have an adjustment period. But they literally, until the autism is diagnosed, they're born into this world, and they have to cope with this sensory overwhelm while their nervous system is actually still developing. It's hardly any wonder that these children have such issues and such problems. So they can't digest life, therefore associated with gut issues and sensitivities. One thing that has been seen and observed by a number of people who are energy sensitive and who have the vision is that their energy bodies are not anchored. They're not grounded. Their energy bodies are elevated. They're not anchored through the body down to the earth, down to the planet. So this is one of the things, and there are some individuals I know who've done energy work with autistic children who, when they start, and it's a slow process, it's an ongoing process, but when they anchor the energy, and the diamond light work was actually sort of one of the tools that they actually used, as they slowly anchor in and enhance the presence within the physical body, that the child's ability to adapt and to relate to the environment was enhanced. So for what it's worth, I'm just going to give you that. Problems with social interaction, communication, restrictive, repetitive patterns of behavior. This characterizes autistic children. It's the only way that they can then make sense of and relate to their environment, because this is just way out there. It's just two-way out. There's no structure. There's no structure to it. So they need that repetitive activity in order to give them some sense of safety and boundaries. Unable to express emotions or to read others' emotion, because if they bring it into their body, it's actually overwhelmed for the nervous system. Maybe passive, aggressive, or disruptive in social environments. So this is, to my mind, it's another manifestation of the eighth wave hologram. And then we have the millennials, and you'll see how, so here we've got, Rachel says, I usually say there's nothing wrong with them. They're wired for a different world. They absolutely are. They're wired for a different world. And they're wired because they are the ones that are going to be, they are processing the holograms of the new world so that it becomes part of our collective field, so that others can access it and begin to create and manifest with it. Okay, so millennials, their negative perceptions, there's negative and positive, they are perceived as lazy, narcissistic, and uncommitted. And that's right brain stuff, okay? And it's the focus on the I, the self-authoring of life, I, me, my life. So that's the narcissistic aspect that is attributed to them. They have expectations very often, and these are generalizations. Expectations of reward for minimal accomplishment. And this is often set up also in childhood, where rewards are given for participation rather than achievement. Now, that's not necessarily the best thing, and it depends on how achievement is actually measured, but what it's leading into is the expectation of I will get something back no matter what I do. Now, we can This does lend itself, if it is appropriately applied, to an enhanced self-esteem, so there's nobody left behind. But it also can lend itself to unrealistic expectations of self and life, that I don't have to apply myself, I will still receive. Rather than I am always worthy and in order to contribute to life, I will actually apply myself from the inside out, if this actually makes sense. I will apply myself to the best of my ability. It matters not what the rewards are as much as it matters what my contribution is. So this has become slightly distorted in the way that this has been applied, if that makes sense. They require constant validation. This is it. So their self-worth is actually minimal. Constant validation and feedback in a work environment. So employing millennials, they just want you to constantly keep giving them feedback on whether they're okay and how good they are, and and so on. And this has been observed by managers and statistically correlated across businesses in the US, which is really quite interesting. They are civically and politically disengaged. It's a negative perception. However, it can also be positive. The thing is that if we want to actually bring changes, we require some input into the political environment. It's no good sitting back and saying they're a bunch of wallies, you know. We need to be civically and politically involved if we want to make the community better for everybody. The thing about the millennials is they're less focused on assisting the greater environment, so they have no concept of this idea of creating better environment and better community for all. It's all about me. So it's very much me focused, focused on extrinsic values such as money, fame, and image, rather than intrinsic self-acceptance and community. And what do we see? We see, you know, women younger and younger and younger adopting this clone type look with the tramp out lips, blowing up the lips, having cosmetic surgeries at an early age in their 20s, you know, surgical enhancements. You kind of go, well, where's their self-esteem if they really feel the need to enhance some of these things that don't need enhancing, you know, in their 20s? So massive focus on self-acceptance. You know, so there's not really that intrinsic sense of value and worth. And also their place in community. So they may be delusional, living in a make-believe world. So it's all, if I structure myself according to how I perceive, or what I perceive is going to bring me success, then that's how it will be in my life. And it's all based on how I look, how much money I have, and how much fame I have. So it's Instagram and, you know, social media, etc., etc. The right brain is the fantasy and the imagination. So it literally is fueled by the right brain constructs, the right brain holograms, the eighth wave holograms, living in a make-believe world. And that's what they're doing. They're creating this make-believe fantasy world. And they're not translating their capabilities into the real world very often. Gross generalization. I know this is just something that is actually being statistically pulled together. So that is the negative perceptions of the millennials. So very similar to, in fact, the indigos. Positive perceptions, and this is influencing the way that our culture is changing. They are open-minded and highly adaptable, very adaptable. They have the capacity to roll with the changes far more easily than what we do because they were born into that frequency of wave. They are supportive of others' rights to be themselves, the LGBTQ, whatever, and minority groups. So it's like, let them do their own thing. I'm me, they are them, you know, you can be you. Self-expressive and very liberal in their thinking, and this is hugely beneficial because it does open up the capacity for new ideas and new thinking. Very receptive to new ways of living. We've got the digital nomads, and I'm one of them. I'm not a millennial, but it's something that the millennials actually introduced as a consequence of the technology, and they travel all over the world and they live very differently to what we think might be a normal way of living. So they are busy creating new ways of living and moving within this system that is constantly changing. And very surprisingly is that they're often less sexually active. So it's a reversal of previous generation trends. There almost seems to be, to an extent, because there are extremes of this, but to an extent, a greater respect for their body, their sovereignty, because it's me focused. It's almost like respecting their sovereignty. So they brought in with it that concept of sovereignty, not necessarily with the spiritual understanding of it. However, they do have this concept of I that's been built up. So, trigger codes for the eighth wave holograms. We have experienced, and we continue to experience these triggers on an ongoing basis. There's lots of lovely stories that have been built up around these codes, but they are strongly visual because the eighth wave holograms are visual and they are image-based, largely because it's the patterns. A pattern is a visual representation of all of those interconnections. So strongly visual. The 1111 and other master number codes have become really, really powerful trigger codes for the eighth wave hologram. So it's the 1111, 2222. People ascribe them to being master numbers, but in essence, what they do is they relate to higher forms of being in their numerical code. Numerical code is actually just a picture. It's a depiction of an energy. So the triggers, the energetic triggers coming in the form of numbers, of light codes, and and light language. So it's really interesting that Rachel's just said the image, because the image here with the light language and the 11 on is Rachel's beautiful creation. She says that image is called All is Interconnected. So light language are these wonderful spirals. It's a language or a form or a depiction of a concept through an entirely different language that we cannot at the moment comprehend and understand. So yes, and there again we need to be discerning. So it's kind of like symbols. So you could say at the moment that our world has become a symbolic world through the eighth wave, because symbols are pictures, visual representations and images. So we are navigating a highly symbolic realm at the moment. And this is one of the diamond light codes that actually presented as part and parcel of the awakening. So we see lots of people talking about lots of different light codes. Remember that light actually, as it moves in spirals, those spirals interact with each other and they project form and shape into a 4D, a four-dimensional space, and that's a proper physics mathematical understanding. So that's where a lot of those shapes and images and encodings are actually being perceived, is in that space. So it's like the divine is actually projecting those essences and images out. It's actually getting darker here. So these are trigger codes actually for the eighth wave holograms that many people are experiencing. They find they're being triggered by numbers 1111 and 111s, and they were all part of my triggering back in 1998, early 1999. Spot on and bang on with the eighth wave. So I'm going to run through this very quickly. Sorry, I'm just actually looking here at the time. So Age of Aquarius versus Age of Leo, and rebalancing North and South planetary hemispheres. The Age of Aquarius is a reference to ultimately an astrological age of approximately 2,160 years, which is based on precessionary cycles. Some of you guys would have heard me talk about this before in previous webcasts. It is linked with the rising constellation relative to the position of the Sphinx in the northern hemisphere only. The opposite side of the planet in the southern hemisphere, the axis and the rising sun would point into the constellation of Leo. So there is no such thing as the Age of Aquarius. It's the Age of Aquarius Leo, because they are intricately partnered, and the two signs would actually balance the planet. So it's absolutely only one, Age of Aquarius, out of balance. Two of them have to be acknowledged, and that's also the North and South hemispheres. So this was just a really interesting little extract from that wonderful song that we all know from the 60s, the iconic song, Dawning of the Age of Aquarius. When the moon is in the 7th house and Jupiter aligns with Mars, when peace will guide the planets and love will steer the stars. And that really became, that's a meme. Here's another beautiful meme that has infiltrated this entire, spiritual community. Astrologer Neil Spencer denounced the lyrics as astrological gibberish, noting that Jupiter aligns with Mars several times a year and the moon is in the 7th house for 2 hours every day. So yeah, that's absolute nonsense. And again, that we're moving into the Age of Aquarius and it's a golden age. It's another meme. And it's another meme that is not thought out, that is not reasoned and not put into perspective. North and South planetary hemispheres. Here you've got the axis. If you look at this circle here, this represents the band of the astrological configurations. Okay, so and it takes 26,500 years to complete an entire circle or cycle of this, and the ancient cultures actually knew this. They knew about precession. But you will see, so I want you to just take a note here, is that this is highlighted from the northern hemisphere. So we're looking at the pole star, the current pole star. But you follow that axis down to the other side of the Earth, and it's coming out. It is equally part of the Earth's axis, and it actually would be connected with a different rotational construct within the heavenly bodies. So you would actually find that that aligns with the Aquarius in the northern hemisphere, and then down here you'll have the North Star pointing towards the Leo constellation. And here is just an indication of the Aquarian age information that's actually put out there. Aquarius is the water jug. It's the water bearer, but it's an air sign from 2160 AD. So we're not there yet, but we're in the cusp. We're actually transiting the new astrological age to 4320. There again, you know, that's based on different models of time, etc., etc. However, what is really interesting, to me, we're in the transition zone already. It's already happening. Is that if we actually look at what the age of Aquarius is, it is air, it's related to mind and the imagination. So what do we have? Eighth wave. Intricate link with the eighth wave dynamics and the eighth wave energies. The abolishment of boundaries, which is also a good thing because we abolish the boundaries in respect of religious dogmas, in respect of between religion and science. So we find that the gaps are narrowing and so on. So we do actually have the breaking down of boundaries, which is a positive thing. Recognition of a common core truth, because it's only when we start breaking down the boundaries that we recognize the commonality that runs through the threads of all of our belief systems. It also brings along with it recognition of wave forms, air, ether, waveforms traveling through air. So we actually see the development within this age of Aquarius and the acknowledgement of vibrational healing. So very, very strong connection there. Boundless removal of limitations is an adverse one, because as we were talking earlier, when we remove all limitations, it's like the gloves are off completely. There's no boundaries. Then we actually struggle to contain our essence. Our physical form is a boundary that contains our unlimited essence, and we were born to create using the merging of those vehicles upon this planet. And mind without heart is actually a dangerous thing, because the mind can conceive of all sorts of things. Think actually the movie Pandora, you know, think about the movies that we've seen recently, Lucy, we've seen Limitless, and the hazards that are inherent with a limitless mind that is not moderated with reason. So that's all right brain, which opens up to possible, as I say, psychoses and mental issues. And it's creation without consequence. And that has to be moderated. So if you look at that, you look at Aquarius, there's nothing that says there, golden age, because there are risks associated with this. The only balancing factor that is absolutely imperative is that opposing polarity from the southern hemisphere, which is the polarity of Leo. It brings fire, it brings in the heart and the solar plexus. So it brings in anchoring, it brings in power, it brings in leadership and direction, which is absolutely necessary in respect of focusing the imagination and what is being accessed. Confidence and guidance, and the integration of love into the equation. So we know that we need to lead with the heart, have the mind open, absolutely, but lead with the heart and let the heart moderate what the mind is conceiving and perceiving. Leo, on its negative polarity or its negative influences, can lend itself to arrogance and dominion over. So it's power over, and certainly arrogance. So those need to be tempered as well. But those two sets of qualities are the balancing effects of the opposite poles of the north and south hemispheres of the planet. So the northern hemisphere is in danger at the moment, and that's where all the transhumanism and everything is actually taking place, of this runaway mind, where the southern hemisphere has been completely ignored. They're actually missing a lot of heart because they have been from the colonial age and the imperial age, they were taken over and then they were completely discarded. most, and left to their own devices. That's kind of like, you know, we've done our bit, you know, be raped and pillaged, now we'll leave you to get on with your lives, kind of thing. So there was a lack of heart and a lack of compassion, and this is actually carried through with many of those cultures, which is one of the reasons why we find a complete lack. There's a lot of power over those negative manifestation of those qualities in the southern hemisphere. Think drug cartels in South America, think the violence in Africa, especially the southern aspects or the southern parts of the continent. So lack of heart energy, real lack of heart energy. So they need to wake up to that, to what was held in place by the fifth wave in the southern hemisphere. And that is going to be vital to balancing this runaway mind and mental constructs of the northern hemisphere. So within us, we need to keep and maintain that balance too. So it's just having that awareness. So the golden age is not the age of Aquarius. The golden age is a balanced representation. And I've put this in just out of interest. Growth always starts at the center and radiates outwards. The innermost source of all powers and manifestations is God. That comes from Elizabeth H. and the book of hers called Initiation. And this was just a depiction across the tree with the tree analogy and everything that we do. And growing outwards, how the tree is measured in respect of its growth through the rings, you know, and it's not immediate, that actually the tree has stood firm through compression and competition, and then expansion again, and fire, and a dry period, because that's life. But the tree stood firm. So we, in our spiritual journey, it's really important that we strive to be like the tree, that we grow from the inside out. We access that core, but we hold our stability through all of those circumstances, the messiness of life, and that we don't get blown over, that we don't get destroyed. And that we don't destroy ourselves by that, because we have an understanding of what those growth factors are through the gifts and the influences of the waves. So that's it for tonight, folks. You know, again, that's just absolutely amazing. 2.5 hours practices for week 5. So I'm just going to give you these very quickly. Energy exercise is practice emptying out. Now I'm going to script something for you. I'll actually send you something out. It's just been an absolutely manic week. I can't believe in the 2 weeks since we gathered, it didn't get this dark by 7:30 2 weeks ago. This is a new development. So I'm sorry. Yeah, I haven't got the big light on. But anyway, is to empty out your being so that the waves pass through and the holograms actually become clearer. When we allow the waves to move, they don't get stuck up against the patterning that we have absorbed, the perhaps challenging negative hologram patterning of each of the earlier waves. So it's to practice going into the silence within, finding out where each of the waves is bumping up against an internal pattern, and then see an internal doorway that you can open to allow the wave and the energy to move through. It's part of the surrendering process. And then developing telepathy. Because we are an integral part of a natural organic internet. And in order for that natural organic internet to become fully entrenched in our reality, each and every one of us must learn to work with our innate gifts, or the innate gifts of the 8th wave, which are the telepathic connectivity and ability to communicate across the air, across the ethers, from heart to heart and mind to mind, without being in physical contact with somebody. So the simplicity of this exercise is, on a daily basis, you choose a time, and you actually, once you've actually done the emptying out with the waves, you just quiet your mind and just quiet everything down, and then you call to mind a specific person, somebody that is actually close to you. This is not about manipulating. This is literally just about connecting with them and saying hi. Send them a little message. It might be a message of love. It might be a message to say, I'd love to talk to you, you know, sort of, please phone me. So whatever it is, practice that telepathy with somebody that you know. Ultimately, I'd like to do it in a group with each other. and set you up with partners, but practice it with somebody that you know. They don't need to know that you're doing it. You just want to bring them to mind. The minute you see the image of that person in your mind, you will be connected with them, because that's how the quantum field works. Actually connect with them, send them a message, and just take note in your journal of what starts to come back in respect of some kind of evidence that they are receiving that message, and some kind of evidence of the validity of your own process. Now, I'm sorry, I know you can't see me at all. So, but that's it. That's the final slide. Yeah, I am in darkness, I know. The whole, you just saw a reflection of my glasses. Next time we're going to have the big light on before we start. So that's it, folks. I just feel as if I've been like going a bit like a freight train again, almost like a Bruce Lipton style. Are there any more comments or any questions? Anything that you'd like to ask or get clarity on before we close up for the session? I like that. Hello, darkness, my old friend. Yeah, thank you, Karen. Karen O'Cara, that's beautiful. Yes, my old friend, absolutely. Okay, so really enjoy this series. Thank you, Rachel. Serge says thank you so much. That's wonderful. I hope you guys have actually sort of taken something from this, because even if it's that you go out into your life and you begin observing and taking note in a different way, and placing context on what it is that you are seeing, it begins to open us up for making different choices and having different responses to situations and circumstances that we find ourselves in. The millennials and those children, they are the way that they are because that's the way that they were born and wired. You know, so re-looking at everything. So I just want to say thank you. Got my hands up. I just want to say thank you for all of you for being live. Those of you who are with us today live, and I really look forward to sharing space with you in 2 weeks' time, and whatever I can script and get out to you between now and then, because it's the equinox tomorrow, then I will do so. So much love. Really big hugs. And let me just make sure that's sharing, meeting. I just want to, oh yeah, it's got stop recording. Yeah, it is recording. Pause recording, stop recording. So I'm going to say thank you, and stop the recording.